Keys to Natural Truth. By Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. 2 kinds of language. 3. Everyday language and Dhamma language. Lecture at Swan Mokha Balarama, Shye. October 8, 1966. Translated by Roderick Bucknell. Today's talk is rather special. Time and time again I have noticed that, regardless of how the subject is explained, there are a great many aspects of the more profound teaching that the majority of people don't understand at all. People hear things explained many times over and still don't understand. Why is this? If we look into it, we discover the reason. Most of us are familiar only with everyday language, the language spoken by the ordinary person, ordinary worldly language. We fail to realize the existence of another quite different and very special language, the language of religion, the language of Dhamma. The language of Dhamma is something altogether different from the language of everyday. This point must be borne well in mind. Everyday language and Dhamma language are 2 distinct and different modes of speaking. Everyday language is worldly language, the language of people who do not know Dhamma. Dhamma language is the language spoken by people who have gained a deep insight into the truth, into Dhamma. Having perceived Dhamma, they speak in terms appropriate to their experience, and so Dhamma language comes into being. This special mode of speaking is what we call Dhamma language. It is a language quite distinct from ordinary everyday language. So there are 2 languages, Dhamma language and everyday language. Everyday language is based on physical things and on experiences accessible to the ordinary person. Being based on the physical rather than the spiritual, it serves only for discussion of physical, worldly matters and situations. It serves only for the tangible things perceived under ordinary everyday circumstances. By contrast, Dhamma language has to do with the mental world, with the tangible, non-physical world. In order to be able to speak and understand this Dhamma language, one must have gained insight into the mental world. Consequently, only people who have seen Dhamma, the truth, speak the Dhamma language, the language of the non-material mental world which is above the physical. Let us put this another way. We distinguish ordinary physical language from metaphysical language. The field of metaphysics is utterly different from that of physics and consequently there is a special metaphysical language. So in addition to the ordinary language of the physical, there is a language that transcends the physical. The physical language is the worldly, conventional language used under ordinary circumstances and based on physical things. The metaphysical language is based on mental things. It has to be learned, studied, and understood. It is based not on the physical world but on the mental. I hope you can now see the distinction between everyday language and Dhamma language. The point now is that if we know only everyday language, we are in no position to understand true Dhamma when we hear it. If we don't know the language of Dhamma, then we can't understand Dhamma, the supramundane truth that can truly liberate us from unsatisfactoriness and misery, dukkha. The reason we don't understand Dhamma is that we know only everyday language and are not familiar with Dhamma language. It is essential always to interpret the Buddha's teaching in terms of Dhamma language as well as in terms of everyday language. Both meanings must be considered. Please take careful note of the following passages. Apamato ubhoathad higanhadi pandito. Dith Dhamma ca yoatho, yo caatho saparayako. Athabasame adhiro panditoti pavakati. The wise and heedful person is familiar with both modes of speaking. The meaning seen by ordinary people and the meaning which they can't understand. One who is fluent in the various modes of speaking is a wise person. This is a general principle to be applied when studying Dhamma, whether at a high or low level. It is also applicable in ordinary spoken language. The passages cited contain the unambiguous expression ubhoath, that is both meaning or both modes of speaking. A discerning person must consider both meanings or modes of speaking and not just one of them alone. Anyone who, for instance, considers only the ordinary everyday meaning and ignores the other meaning, the meaning in terms of Dhammalanugage, cannot be called a wise or discerning person. As the Buddha said, a discerning person is one who is able to take into consideration both modes of speaking. It behoves us, then, to be careful and to study diligently in order to acquire this ability to take into account both possible interpretations. The one in terms of everyday language and the other in terms of Dhamma language. We shall now consider some examples of what I mean. Each of the following words will be explained according to both everyday language and Dhamma language. This should enable you to clearly understand both modes of expression. Buddha. The first example is the word Buddha. As you know, the word Buddha in everyday language refers to the historical enlightened being, Gautama Buddha. It refers to a physical man of flesh and bone who was born in India over 2000 years ago, died, and was cremated. This is the meaning of the word Buddha in everyday language. Considered in terms of Dhamma language, however, the word Buddha refers to the truth which the historical Buddha realized and taught, namely the Dhamma itself. The Buddha said, "One who sees the Dhamma sees the Tathagata." A word the Buddha often used to refer to himself. One who sees the Tathagata sees the Dhamma. One who sees not the Dhamma, though grasping at the robe of the Tathagata, cannot be said to have seen the Tathagata. Now, the Dhamma is something intangible. It is not something physical, certainly not flesh and bones. Yet the Buddha said it is one and the same as the enlightened one. One who sees the Dhamma sees the Tathagata. Anyone who fails to see the Dhamma cannot be said to have seen the enlightened one. So in Dhamma language, the Buddha is one and the same as that truth by virtue of which he became the Buddha, and anyone who sees that truth can be said to have seen the true Buddha. To see just his physical body would not be to see the Buddha at all and would bring no real benefit. During the Buddha's lifetime, the majority of people were unfavorably disposed towards him. Some abused him and even did him physical harm. They didn't understand him because what they saw was only his physical body, the outer shell, the Buddha of everyday language. The real Buddha, the Buddha of Dhamma language, is the truth in his mind, knowing which the man becomes Buddha. When he said, "Whoever sees the truth see me. Whoever sees me sees the truth," he was speaking Dhamma language. Again, the Buddha said, "The Dhamma and the Vinaya, discipline, which I have proclaimed and have demonstrated, these shall be your teacher when I have passed away." Thus the real Buddha has not passed away, has not ceased to exist. What ceased to exist was just the physical body, the outer shell. The real teacher, that is, the Dhamma Vinaya, is still with us. This is the meaning of the word Buddha in Dhamma language. The Buddha of Dhamma language is the Dhamma itself, which made him Buddha. Dhamma. The second word to consider is Dhamma, Dharma in Sanskrit. At the childish level of everyday language, the word is understood as referring to the actual books that contain the scriptures, the Dhamma in the bookcase. Or it may be understood as referring to the spoken word used in expounding the teaching. This is the meaning of the word Dhamma in everyday language, the language of deluded people who has not yet seen the true Dhamma. In term of Dhamma language, the Dhamma is one and the same as the enlightened one. One who sees the Dhamma sees the Tathagata. One who sees the Tathagata sees the Dhamma. This is the real Dhamma. In the original Pali language, the word Dhamma was used to refer to all of the intricate and involved things that go to make up what we call nature. Time will not permit us to discuss this point in detail here, so we shall mention just the main points. The word Dhamma embraces 1. Nature itself. 2. The law of nature. 3. The duty of each human being to act in accordance with the law of nature. 4. The benefits to be derived from this acting in accordance with the law of nature. This is the wide range of meaning covered by the word Dhamma. It does not refer simply to books, palm leaf manuscripts, or the voices of preachers. The word Dhamma, as used in Dhamma language, refers to non-material things. Dhamma is all-embracing, it is profound, it includes all things, some difficult to understand and some not so difficult. Sangha. Now we shall consider the word Sangha. In everyday language, the word Sangha refers to the community of monks who wear the yellow robe and wander from place to place. This is the Sangha as it is understood in everyday language, the language of the unenlightened person who has not yet seen the truth. In Dhamma language, the word Sangha refers once again to the truth, to the Dhamma itself. It refers to the high qualities, of whatever kind and degree, that exist in the mind of the monk, the man of virtue. There are certain high mental qualities that make a man a monk. The totality of these high qualities existing in the mind of the monk is what is called the Sangha. The Sangha of everyday language is the assembly of monks themselves. The Sangha of Dhamma language are those high qualities in the minds of the monks. The Sangha proper consists of these four levels: the stream enterer, Sotapanna, the once returner, Sakadagami, the non-returner, Anagami, and the fully perfected being, Arahant, worthy one, undefiled by any egoism. These terms, too, refer to mental rather than physical qualities, because the physical frames of these people are in no way different from those of anyone else. Where they do differ is in mental or spiritual qualities. This is what make a person a stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, or arahant. This is how the word Sangha is to be understood in Dhamma language. Religion. Now we come to the word religion, Sasana. In everyday language, the language of the undiscerning person, the word religion refers simply to temples, monastery buildings, pagodas, saffron robes, and so on. If there are pagodas and temples all over the place, people say, "Ah, the religion is thriving." This is what religion means in everyday language. In Dhamma language, the word religion refers to the genuine Dhamma which can truly serve people as a refuge or point of support. The Dhamma which actually can be for people a basis of support, which really can bring about the end of dukkha, suffering, misery, unsatisfactoriness, the Dhamma is the religion. This is the meaning of religion as that term is used in Dhamma language. The religion is thriving means that this very special something which has the power to put an end to dukkha is spreading and expanding among people. To say that the religion is thriving does not by any means imply progress in terms of yellow robes. The religion in everyday language is temples, monastery buildings, pagodas, yellow robes, and so on. The religion in Dhamma language is the truth which genuinely serves humanity as a refuge. Those who take the word religion to mean the teaching are nearer the mark than those who take it as standing for temples and so on. To consider progress in religion study and instruction as true religious progress is correct up to a point. But it is not good enough. To understand the religion as simply the teaching is still to understand it only in terms of everyday language. In terms of Dhamma language, the religion is the sublime or excellent way of life, Brahmacharya, that is to say, life lived in accordance with Dhamma. It is this exalted way of living which is glorious in its beginning, middle, and end. By sublime way of life the Buddha meant the way of practice that can really extinguish dukkha, suffering. The glory of its beginning is study and learning, the glory of its middle is the practice, the glory of its end is the real reward that comes from the practice. This is the sublime way of life, the religion of Dhamma language. Taken as everyday language, religion means at best the teaching; taken as Dhamma language, it means the sublime ways of life, glorious in its beginning, middle, and end. The two meanings are very different. Keys to Natural Truth. By Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. Two kinds of language. Everyday language and Dhamma language. 2. Lecture at Swan Mokha Balarama, Shye. October 8, 1966. Translated by Roderick Bucknell. Work. Looking now more closely at things, we shall examine a word that relates to our day-to-day life, the word work. In everyday language, the word work refers to earning a living. It is something we can't avoid. We have to work in order to eat, to fill the belly, and to satisfy sensual desires. This is unavoidable chore of earning a living is what is meant by the word work taken as everyday language. Taken as Dhamma language, work refers to mind training, Kamathana, that is, the practice of Dhamma. The actual practice of Dhamma is the work. Ordinary people, those who have not seen Dhamma, work out of necessity in order to provide themselves with food and the things they desire. But for the genuine aspirant, the person who has caught a glimpse of Dhamma, work consists in putting the Dhamma into practice. This kind of work has to be done sincerely, earnestly, and diligently, with perseverance and discernment. Many kinds of high qualities must be present if it is to be completed successfully. The work of everyday language can be considered at a higher level. Though our work may be of a worldly nature, if we do it the right way, then ultimately that work will teach us. It will bring us to an understanding of the true nature of the mental life. It will enable us to recognize impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-selfhood, anakam, duksam, anatta. It will bring us to the truth, without our making any conscious effort in that direction. So in Dhamma language, work refers to the practice that leads to the truth found right in one's own mind. Even the job of keeping the body fit and clean is a kind of Dhamma practice. Insofar as it has to be done with a good, discerning, industrious mind. In summary, work in everyday language means earning a living out of necessity. Work in Dhamma language means putting the Dhamma into practice. The word kamathana, mind training, means work, good solid Dhamma practice. This is the meaning of work in Dhamma language. Sublime life. Let us say something more about the sublime way of life. In the everyday language of the average person who know nothing of Dhamma, the words sublime life, brahmacharya, mean no more than abstention from improper sexual activity. But in Dhamma language, sublime way of life refers to any kind of purposeful giving up of mental defilement, kilsa, and to any form of spiritual practice which is adhered to rigorously. Regardless of what kind of practice we undertake, if we stick to it earnestly, strictly, and without backsliding, then we are living this most exalted way of life. Sublime doesn't mean simply abstaining from fornication and adultery. This is how everyday language and Dhamma language differ. Nibbana. Now we make a big jump to the word nibbana, nirvana in Sanskrit. In the everyday language of the ordinary person, nibbana is a place or a city. This is because preachers often speak of Nibbana, the city of immortality, or this wonder city of Nibbana. People hearing this misunderstand it. They take it to mean that Nibbana is an actual city or place. What is more, they even believe that it is a place abounding in all sorts of good things, a place where one's every wish is fulfilled and everything one wants is immediately available. They want to get to Nibbana because it is the place where all wishes are granted. This is Nibbana in the everyday language of foolish people who know nothing of Dhamma. Yet this kind of talk can be heard all over the place, even in most temples. In Dhamma language, the word Nibbana refers to the complete and absolute extinction of every kind of defilement and misery. Any time there is freedom from kilsa and dukkha, there is Nibbana. If defilements have been eradicated completely, it is permanent Nibbana, the total extinguishing and cooling of the fire of kilsa and dukkha. This is Nibbana in Dhamma language. In everyday language, Nibbana is a dream city. In Dhamma language, Nibbana is the complete and utter extinction of dukkha right here and now. Think about it. In which of these two ways is Nibbana understood by most people, in particular by the old folk who come to listen to sermons in temples? Path and fruit. Pressing on now, we come to the expression path and fruit, Magaphala. The expression path and fruit is so popular it has become hackneyed. Even ordinary people doing any old thing may refer to path and fruit. As soon as something turns out according to plan, they say, it's path and fruit. Even the most worldly of worldlings in the most worldly of situations will say, it's path and fruit, meaning that things have turned out as hoped. This is how the term path and fruit is used in everyday language. But in Dhamma language, path and fruit refers to the destruction of dukkha and the defilements which give rise to it. To do this in the right manner, step by step, in accordance with the true nature of things, is the meaning of path and fruit in Dhamma language. People are much given to using the expression path and fruit in everyday speech. To distinguish this everyday usage from the special usage of Dhamma language, we have to be very careful. Mara. Now we turn to a rather strange word, the word Mara, the tempter, the devil. The Mara of everyday language is conceived as a kind of monster with body, face, and eyes of repulsive and terrifying appearance. Mara in Dhamma language, however, is not a living creature but rather any kind of mental state opposed to the good and wholesome and to progress towards the cessation of dukkha. That which opposes and obstructs spiritual progress is called Mara. We may think of Mara as a living being if we wish, as long as we understand what he really stands for. No doubt you have often heard the story of how Mara came down from the Paranimitavasavati realm to confront the Buddha to be. This was the real Mara the tempter. He came down from the highest heaven, the Paranimitavasavati realm, which is a heaven of sensual enjoyments of the highest order. A paradise abounding in everything the heart could desire, where someone is always standing by to gratify one's every wish. This is Mara the tempter, but not the one with the ugly, ferocious countenance and reddened mouth, who is supposed to go around catching creatures to suck their blood. That is Mara as ignorant people picture him. It is the Mara of the everyday language of ignorant people who don't know how to recognize Mara when they see him. In Dhamma language, the word Mara means at worst the heaven known as Paranimitavasavati, the highest realm of sensuality. In general it means any mental state opposed to the good and wholesome, opposed to spiritual progress. This is Mara in Dhamma language. World. Now we shall say something about the word world, loka. In everyday language, the word world refers to the earth, this physical world, flat or round or however you conceive it. The world as the physical earth is everyday language. In Dhamma language, however, the word world refers to worldly, lokiya, mental states, the worldly stages in the scale of mental development, that is to say, dukkha. The condition that is impermanent, changing, unsatisfactory, this is the worldly condition of the mind. And this is what is meant by the world in Dhamma language. Hence it is said that the world is dukkha, dukkha is the world. When the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truth, Arya Sacca, he sometimes used the term world and sometimes the term dukkha. They are one and the same. For instance, he spoke of the world, the cause of the arising of the world, the extinction of the world, the path that brings about the extinction of the world. What he meant was dukkha, the cause of dukkha, the extinction of dukkha, the path that brings about the extinction of dukkha. So in the language of the Buddha, the language of Dhamma, the word world refers to dukkha, suffering and the world are one and the same. Taken another way, the word world refers to things that are low, shallow, not profound, and fall short of their highest potential. For instance, we speak of such and such a thing as worldly, meaning that it is not Dhamma. This is another meaning of the word world in Dhamma language. World does not always refer simply to this earth, as in everyday language. Birth. Now, going a little higher, we come to the word birth, jatai. In everyday language, the word birth refers to physically coming into the world from the mother's womb. A person is born physically only once. Having been born, one lives in the world until one dies and enters the coffin. Physical birth happens to each of us only once. This birth from the mother's womb is what is meant by birth in everyday language. In Dhamma language, the word birth refers to the birth of the idea I or ego that arises in the mind throughout each day. In this sense, the ordinary person is born very often, time and time again, a more developed person is born less frequently. A person well advanced in practice, Aryan, noble one, is born less frequently still, and ultimately ceases being born altogether. Each arising in the mind of the idea of I in one form or another is called a birth. Thus, birth can take place many times over in a single day. As soon as one starts thinking like an animal, one is born as an animal in that same moment. To think like a human being is to be born a human being. To think like a celestial being is to be born a celestial being. Life, the individual, pleasure and pain, and the rest, all these were identified by the Buddha as simply momentary states of consciousness. So the word birth means in Dhamma language the arising of the idea of I or me, and not, as in everyday language, physical birth from the mother's womb. The word birth is very common in the Buddha's discourses. When he was speaking of everyday things, he used the word birth with its everyday meaning. But when he was expounding higher Dhamma, for instance, when discussing conditioned arising, paticca he used the word birth, jatai, with the meaning it has in Dhamma language. In his description of conditioned arising, he wasn't talking about physical birth. He was talking about the birth of attachment to the ideas of me and mine, myself and my own. Death. Now let's consider the word death. Death in everyday language means that event which necessitates putting something in a coffin and cremating or burying it. But in Dhamma language, the word death refers to the cessation of the idea mentioned just a moment ago, the idea of I or me. The ceasing of this idea is what is meant by death in Dhamma language. Life. Let's talk about the word life. This word in everyday language, the language of immature people, applies to anything that is not yet dead, that still exists, moves about, walks, and eats. In the more precise language of biology, it refers the normal functioning of the protoplasm, of the cell and nucleus. The normal functioning and development of these is referred to as life. This is an even more materialistic kind of everyday language. In Dhamma language, life refers to the truly deathless state, the unconditioned, nibbana, life without limitations. This is life. If we are speaking everyday language, life has the ordinary familiar meaning. If we are speaking Dhamma language, life refers to the deathless state. When there is no birth, there is also no death. This state is the unconditioned. It is what we call nibbana, and what in other religions is often spoken of as the life everlasting. It is life that never again comes to an end. It is life in God, or whatever one cares to call it. This is the real life, life as understood in Dhamma language. Keys to Natural Truth. By Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. Two kinds of language. Everyday language and Dhamma language. 3. Lecture at Swan Mokha Balarama, Shye. October 8, 1966. Translated by Roderick Bucknell. Person. Now we come closer to home, to the word person. We think nothing of using the word person, person, person all the time. Everyone is a person. But we ought to be careful here, because the word person has two different meanings. In everyday language, person refers to a creature with a body shaped like what they call a person or human being. But in Dhamma language, the word person refers to certain special qualities implied in the word human, which means possessing a lofty mind or high-minded. Certain high mental qualities. This is not so difficult to understand. If someone criticizes a friend saying, "You're not a person," what does he mean? The one criticized has a human body just as does the one criticizing. Why, then, is the first accused of not being a person? The point is that he lacks the special qualities implied in the word human. Lacking these, he is accused of not being a person. Thus, the word person has two different meanings. In everyday language, it refers to a creature of human form. In Dhamma language, it refers to the higher mental or spiritual qualities implied in the word human. God. Now we consider the word God. In everyday language, God refers to a celestial being with various creative powers. This is the God of everyday language. The God of Dhamma language is rather different. It is a profound and hidden power, which is neither human being, nor celestial being, nor any other kind of being. It has no individuality or self, and it is impersonal. It is natural and intangible. It is what we call the law of nature, for this law is responsible for creation and for the coming into existence of all things. Natural law governs all things. Natural law has power over all things. Hence in Dhamma language, the word God means, among other things, the law of nature, what Buddhists call Dhamma. In the Pali language, the law of nature was referred to simply as Dhamma. Dhamma, just that one single word, implies all of the law of nature. So Dhamma is the Buddhist God. Woeful states. Now let us direct our gaze downwards. Let us look at the four woeful states, apaya. The woeful states are the nether worlds. Normally four of them are recognized: hell, Naraka, the realm of the beasts, Tirukana, the realm of the hungry ghosts, Peta, and the realm of the frightened ghosts, Asura or Ajurakaya. These four as a group are called the four woeful states. They are vividly depicted in temple murals. Hell, the beasts, the hungry ghosts, and the asuras are all depicted according to traditional beliefs, which means all four are thought to apply only after death. In other words, the four woeful states as understood in everyday language are interpreted materialistically. The denizens of hell, the beasts, and so on are thought of as actual lowly, flesh and blood creatures. In everyday language, hell is a region under the earth. It is ruled over by the god of death, who carries off people and subjects them to all sorts of punishments. It is a place where one may go after death. Contrast this with hell as understood in Dhamma language. Here hell is anxiety, anxiety which burns us just like a fire. Whenever anxiety afflicts us, burning us up like a fire, then we are in hell, the hell of Dhamma language. Anyone who roasts himself with anxiety, just as he might burn himself with fire, is said to fall into hell in that same moment. And just as anxiety is of various kinds, so we recognize various kinds of hells corresponding to them. Now to the realm of beasts, Tirukana. Birth as a beast means in everyday language actual physical birth as a pig, a dog, or some other actual animal. Rebirth after death as some kind of lower animal is the everyday meaning of rebirth into the realm of the beasts. In Dhamma language, it has a different meaning. When one is stupid, just like a dumb animal, then at that moment one is born into the realm of beasts. It happens right here and now. One may be born as a beast many times over in a single day. So in Dhamma language, birth as a beast means stupidity. The term hungry ghost, Pita, in everyday language refers to a creature supposed to have a tiny mouth and an enormous belly. It can never manage to eat enough and so is chronically hungry. This is another possible form in which we may be reborn after death. These are the hungry ghosts of everyday language. The hungry ghosts of Dhamma language are purely mental states. Ambition based on craving, worry based on craving, to be afflicted with these is to be born a hungry ghost. These symptoms are just like those that result from having a mouth the size of a needle's eye and a belly the size of a mountain. Anyone suffering from an intense craving, a pathological thirst, anyone who worries and frets excessively, a pathological thirst. Anyone who worries and frets excessively, has the same symptoms as a hungry ghost. Such a person can be said to have been reborn a hungry ghost right here and now. It is not something that happens only after death. Now to the Asura or frightened ghosts. In everyday language, an Asura is a kind of invisible being. It goes around haunting and spooking, but is too afraid to show itself. In Dhamma language, the word Asura refers to fear in the mind of a human being. To be reborn as an Asura, it is not necessary for the body to die. Whenever one is afraid, one is simultaneously reborn an Asura. To be afraid without good reason, to be excessively fearful, to be superstitiously afraid of certain harmless creatures, this is what it is to be reborn as an Asura. Some people are afraid of doing good. Some are afraid that if they attain Nibbana, life will lose all its flavor and be unbearably dull. Some people do have this kind of fear of Nibbana. To be afflicted with unjustified fear of this kind is to be reborn as an Asura right here and now. These are the four woeful states as understood in Dhamma language. They rather different from the woeful states of everyday language. Now there is a point worth thinking about in connection with this. If we don't fall into the woeful states of Dhamma language, then we are sure not to fall into the woeful states of everyday language. For instance, if we avoid making the mistakes that lead to affliction with anxiety, then we avoid falling into hell in this life. At the same time, we need have no fear of falling into hell in some later lifetime after death. Again, if we avoid being stupid like the beasts, ravenous like the hungry ghosts, and frightened like the Asura, then we are free of the kinds of unskillful attitudes that might cause us to be reborn after death as beasts, hungry ghosts, or Asura. So it behoves us to interest ourselves only in these woeful states that we are in danger of experiencing right here and now. The kind that we may experience after death can be put aside. There is no need for us to concern ourselves with them. If we avoid right here and now the hungry ghosts and other woeful states as understood in Dhamma language, then no matter how we die, we are certain not to fall into the woeful states of everyday language. If we live and practice properly, we avoid falling into the woeful states here and now, and we are certain not to fall into the woeful states that are supposed to follow death. Most people recognize that heaven and hell are simply states of mind. Why, then, are they so foolish as to misunderstand the meaning of the four woeful states, which are so much a part of life? True enough, the heaven and hell of everyday language are external realms, though don't ask me where, and they are attained after death. But the heaven and hell of Dhamma language are to be found in the mind and may occur at any time, depending on one's mental makeup. This is how the woeful states of Dhamma language differ from those of everyday language. Heaven. Heaven in everyday language means some wonderful, highly attractive, celestial realm up above. Spend a certain amount of money in merit making and you are entitled to one mansion in heaven, where there are angels by the hundreds. In Dhamma language, however, heaven refers first of all to infatuating sensual bliss of the highest order. This is the lower heaven, the heaven of sensuality. Higher up is the heaven called the Brahma Loka, where there are no objects of sensuality. It is a state of mental well-being that results from the absence of any disturbing sensual object. It is as if a certain person with a hunger for sense objects had indulged himself until becoming thoroughly fed up with all sense objects. Then he would want only to remain quite empty, still, untouched. This is the state of freedom from sensuality, the condition of the Brahma gods in the Brahma Loka. The ordinary heavens are full up with sensuality, the highest of them, the Paranimitavasavati heaven, being completely full of sensuality. The heavens of the Brahma Loka, however, are devoid of disturbance from sensuality, though the self, the I still persists. Ambrosia. Now let us discuss the word ambrosia, the elixir of immortality. In everyday language, ambrosia is a kind of liquor that celestial beings imbibe to make themselves invulnerable before going out again to slaughter and cause general havoc. This is the ambrosia of everyday language. The ambrosia of Dhamma language is Dhamma at its highest, the truth of not-self, anatta, or emptiness, sunyata. This highest Dhamma, the truth of not-self or emptiness, makes a person immortal because it brings freedom from the self-idea. When there is no self, how can there be death? So in Dhamma language, the elixir of life is the truth of not-self or emptiness. As for the liquor which is traditionally supposed to confer eternal life on whoever drinks it, that is the ambrosia of everyday language. The language of foolish people, the language of people who have not perceived or penetrated to the truth. Emptiness. A moment ago we mentioned the word emptiness, sunyata. Let us now have a closer look at it. Sunyata is a Pali word. Suna means void or empty, and ta is the equivalent of ness. Sunyata is emptiness or voidness. In the everyday language of people who have not seen or penetrated to the truth, emptiness means simply the absence of any content whatsoever, a physical void, a vacuum, a useless nothingness. This is emptiness in everyday language. Emptiness or sunyata in Dhamma language is quite different. Here everything of every kind and variety may be present in any quantity, everything, that is, with the single exception of the ideas of me and mine. Everything may be present, everything of every sort and kind you can think of, the entire lot of both physical and mental phenomena. With just this one exception, there is no idea of me and mine. No I, no my, that is emptiness as it is understood in Dhamma language, the language of the Buddha. The world is empty. Empty of what? Empty of self and anything belonging to self. With this single exception, everything may be present, as long as nothing is regarded as me or mine. This is the emptiness of Dhamma language. When the Buddha spoke of emptiness, he was speaking Dhamma language. Foolish people understand this as everyday language and take it that there is nothing I the world at all, just a vacuum. If the word emptiness is misinterpreted like this in term of everyday language, the Buddha's teaching of emptiness becomes meaningless. Those foolish people come out with many strange assertions that have nothing whatever to do with emptiness as taught by the Buddha. I hope you will take an interest in this and bear it well in mind. This word empty applied to physical things naturally means absence of any content. But in the metaphysical context, it means that though every sort of thing may be present, there is utter absence of I-ness and my-ness. In the physical world, the mental world, or anywhere at all, there is no such thing as me or mine. The conditions of I-ness and my-ness just do not exist. They are unreal, mere illusions, hence the world is described as empty. It is not that the world is devoid of all content. Everything is there, and it can be made use of with discernment. Go ahead and make use of it. Just one thing though, don't go producing the ideas of me and mine. Thus, in Dhamma language, empty does not mean devoid of all content. Anyone who takes it as meaning this is ignorant of Dhamma and ignorant of the language of Dhamma. Such a person is speaking only everyday language. If we go forcing this everyday meaning into the context of Dhamma language, how can we ever make any sense of Dhamma? Do make a special effort to understand this word. It has these two quite distinct meanings.